think there's always the risk that the role that is going to be, in a sense, define your career, well, thus far, is going to be Lord of the Rings. Aragorn is going to be there. But at the point when Peter Jackson approached you, you had not read the books,
no.
had you? But your son had, is that right?
My son knew the story, and the long and complicated story. And I just thought it was crazy on their part, you know, when they were already underway shooting, to try to have someone play the part who had no idea what it was about. Even if I hadn't recognized many of the themes, and that essentially the foundation of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is, you know, Nordic literature and mythology and Celtic as well, but it's something that I was very familiar with.
So even though you like to do this extensive research and have that preparation, you felt sufficiently familiar with the material to be able to say yes at that point?
On the airplane, I was grasping anything I could. And when I realized, oh, this reminds me of that saga, and this reminds me of that, then one of the first things I did after, you know, in between the crash course I had with sword play training with Bob Anderson, and the dialect coach, and the costume fittings and everything else. And I found as many copies of, say, the Volsunga saga and other sagas to reread them. Another thing I thought of, if you want to know, is that I was listening to what I was speaking there. And I remember having this idea, because the character over 3 movies, you know, should gradually reveal himself for who he really is. It wasn't just the way what he called himself and how he dressed, his behavior, but it was also the fact that he was a ranger and he was around certain people from a certain part of Middle-earth. To me, that's why he would speak that way. That was part of his disguise and had been for quite some time. And I wanted to make a gradual transition so that by the end, by the coronation scene, that his accent would gradually change and become more refined, and he would let all of those masks, you know, fall away, so to speak. So it partially worked, but it made me think of that. Anyway.
But what emerges really powerfully in that excerpt, and I think is the emotional motor for the film, and it's something that in a sense was quite unfashionable in film at the time, was this idea of self-sacrifice, which is so important in the whole Lord of the Rings story. Yeah. You know, people who are prepared to give up their lives or their freedom for the greater good. Mm-hmm. And I think probably that's something that when I initially thought of Lord of the Rings as a big epic, hadn't realised would come through as strongly as it did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's due to the kinds of actors that Peter Jackson cast, but also his approach, you know, as much as certainly after the first movie, he became more and more interested in pursuing something that he's very good at, which is special effects and the sort of more fantastical visual aspects of the storytelling. He did maintain an interest in, you know, the emotional through lines of the characters, their worries, their fears, and, you know, here again on the page, you know, could easily have played that part with a certain stoicism that would have been devoid of any real serious doubt.
So we end the show, as you know, and you always give me a hard time about it, in some kind of song. Guitar, and you know, I think there's a guitar here. No, come on.
No.
You did it on camp. You did it.
I can't.
You can. You know you
no,
can.
I can't.
You can hum me something.
I
Look at
I
this.
really can't.
This is Aragorn. As now he's in abject fear and loathing.
Yeah.
He can't.
Death.
Something.
I can't.
I need something musical from you, Viggo. I have to have something. The slightest bit of something. Look at me. I'm desperate.
Endorena utulien, si no me maruvan, adil dinyar tenambar meta. I don't know if that's all the words.
What is that?
That's the king's song
is that the
at
song
the coronation.
From Lord of, the coronation.
In Elvish.
You
happy now? I'm not sure. I got a phone call to ask if I wanted to get on a plane the next day and go to New Zealand for a year and a half. And at first, I actually said, I don't know. You know, I haven't read this book, and I'm not sure that that I would do justice. You know, you don't want to let people down who are passionate and who are working hard on something. So I was tentative about it at first, but I'm glad I said yes to the challenge.
Did you go immediately and read the book, or what did you do?
I started reading it on the plane.
Yeah.
What have I
Did
got
you
myself
finish it
into?
by the time you got to New Zealand?
No, but I read enough actually to realize that it wasn't such a foreign thing to me.
Yeah.
After all, that there were elements that were familiar to me. I mean, the sources for Tolkien's writing were not all unfamiliar. You know, a lot of it is based on Nordic mythology, Celtic mythology, sagas, fairy tales. I mean, there's such a gold mine of information in there that, I mean, personally, I could relate it to Western movie archetypes, samurai movies, all kinds of things. And so then I thought, well, this is good. I'm going to pretend I'm a Viking, you know, like I used to when I was 7 years old. And,
You wanted to do that since you were 7?
So, well, I didn't realize it, but obviously.
You obviously do sing the movie.
Yeah.
All right. You were obviously making a political statement with your T-shirt.
I wouldn't normally, but it's sort of a reaction to, I've heard a lot of people say to me, and I've read in a lot of places about the first movie and increasingly about the second one. I've seen where people try to relate it to, the current situation, specifically the United States and their role in the world right now. And if you're going to compare, then you should get it right. You know, I don't like hearing, I played a character who's defending Helm's Deep, and I don't think that the Two Towers or Tolkien's writing or Peter's work or our work has anything to do with the United States foreign adventures, at this time. And it upsets me to hear that in a way. And it upsets me even more that questioning what's going on right now, what the United States is doing, is considered treasonous, really. And how dare you say that, and how un-American of you. And really, this country is founded on the principle that if the government isn't serving the people, you at least have the right to say, wait a minute, what's going on? And there's no questions really being asked at large about what we're doing. Whereas in the Two Towers, you have different races, nations, cultures coming together, examining their conscience and unifying against a very real and terrifying enemy. What the United States has been doing for the past year is bombing innocent civilians without having come anywhere close to catching Osama bin Laden or any presumed enemies. And, as a distraction, we're now, apparently it's a given. We're hell-bent on increasing the bombing that's been going on for the past 11 years in Iraq. And I don't think that the civilians on the ground in those countries look at us in the way that maybe Europeans did, at the end of World War II, waving flags in the streets. I think that they see the U.S. government as Saruman,
As a threat.
Yeah, as a threat, and they're terrified and have been for a long time, and we are not the good guys, unfortunately, in this case. And
even though right after 9/11 there was an extraordinary amount of public support for the United States to do something.
I'm supportive of the United States. I'm an American, and I have nothing against patriotism, but if one is going to compare, then the comparison is quite the opposite of what's
let me just make
made.
sure the comparison, only because you and I asked you about the T-shirt at the beginning, and you said you made it yourself.
Yeah.
The idea, you object to the comparison of this film with respect to American involvement with Iraq or the Afghanistan war or the war against terrorism, to any comparison with the film, as because of your fierce opposition to American policy.
The idea is, that in that comparison is the United States is like the good guys in our movie against the bad guys in our movie, and I think the opposite is true, unfortunately.
That we're the bad guys because we responded to
the people who are terrified at Helm's Deep, who are outnumbered in this incredible violence and desire to control, to destroy the people of Rohan and the rest of the free peoples of Middle Earth, to control their wills, to control their, infrastructure or destroy it. That's what we're doing in these countries. That's really what we're doing, unfortunately. And I'm not saying to anyone, to you or to you or to you, this is what you should believe. I'm just saying
why not ask the question, why are we doing this?
Sure.
You know, and I don't like the comparison, and I keep hearing it, so I'm felt like saying something about it. You know, I'm not really a fan of the saying, my country, right or wrong. Well, that's an incomplete quote, too. The rest of it is more reasonable. I'm more of a fan of saying, let's make an honest effort to get it right. I think the rest of the quote is, if we're getting it right, let's keep trying to do so, and if we're getting it wrong, let's try to get it right. I think he says something like that. You know?
I want to turn from this, but let me just stay with the idea for a second, though. I mean, what would you have had the United States do after the attack at the Pentagon and at the Twin Towers?
I would not have continually bombed innocent civilians from 30,000 feet with no possibility of being accurate, and maiming and killing and destroying the lives of many more people than died at the World Trade Center. What does that do? Does bombing people make us safer? Does bombing people make us more loved or appreciated overseas? Will this be forgotten? Oh, well, it was just a little mistake.
What if they had been able to stop Al-Qaeda, and you wouldn't have had, if there is the connection, which many people think it is, in terms of the attacks in Kenya, for example, or other acts of terrorism against the United States and other countries?
I just
if somehow by responding you can say, because most people believe that if in fact you don't respond, you're inviting more terrorism.
There's nothing wrong with responding, it's how do you respond. The fact that one even questions the way that we responded, that's considered some kind of fifth column thinking.
They're still fans of Lord of the Rings. That's going to follow you forever, you know. I wonder, do people always, do they come up, is that the movie they come up to you the most and stop you on the street, or others?
There was a period, you know, you gauge it by the red carpets, or sometimes people on the street, like what pictures or what DVDs or posters are they wanting you to sign. And there was a period, you know, after those movies came out, it was just that. And, but over the years, you know, like, say, starting 6-7 years ago, it started to be more, like, not more than that. There's always a predominance of Lord of the Rings. But there would be, you know, the Cronenberg movies, Hidalgo, depending where I was in the world, some foreign movies that I've done, and a lot of, I've signed, during the rollout of Green Book, I've signed a lot of Captain Fantastic memorabilia, so. Oh, yeah. So it's more balanced, but, you know, I don't, you know, people often ask me, journalists or people, does it bother you that people are constantly wanting to come up to you and start talking in Elvish, thinking you're going to be able to have a full conversation, or, you know, the Lord of the Rings thing? And I said, no, why would that bother me? It was a great experience, and it opened the door, you know, I wouldn't have been Cronenberg, even if he wanted me to play the lead in History of Violence, and when he was casting me in 2004, there's no way that a studio would have said, yeah, okay, unless I'd been in that smash hit. It was great for me and everybody else involved in it, so of course I'm honored every time somebody comes by. It's like, great. I mean, it gave me a chance to do that. It gave me a chance to have the same studio that made Lord of the Rings say, yeah, of course, Ed, you know, when Ed Harris wanted me to be in Appaloosa with him, it was not a problem, and that was largely due to the success of Lord of the Rings. So it would be rude and short-sighted of me to, I mean, even if I felt that way, which I don't have any resentment, or why would I? I mean, it's great. It's wonderful when anybody relates to your work or to the story you were in, because that's essentially why I got into it. I was relating in that way to what I was watching. I was fascinated with it and curious, and you do get really good questions from people. There's people that know so much about a particular movie that they can not only recite lines, but they'll ask you, why did the screenwriter choose that line at that time? And you're scratching your head thinking, like 20 movies ago, why? And sometimes they're right. You're like, you know what? I wish you'd been around, because we would have done a lot better job. But what are you going to do?
So much stuff happened to you on these. I heard on Towers that you actually broke your tooth, and you said, don't stop or something. You went to the crew and said, get some super glue or something, just put it right back in?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go to the dentist later, but I figured let's not lose. We got a whole crew here, and let's keep going. But it was the lunch break, and they insisted. So I went into downtown in my costume. It was quite something. I walked into the dentist's office,
And I was spattered with this black stuff, which is the orc blood. As you Lord of the Rings experts know, they don't have red blood, they have black blood. And so I was kind of splattered with all this stuff, and the guy sort of fixed me up. I said, don't wipe the blood off, that's continuity. And he put in a piece of, this new, it still hasn't come off. He did a good job. It was actually Peter Jackson's dentist, and he did it, boom, like that. And I said, okay, thank you, I'll talk to you later, I gotta go. And we went back, and then I was fighting with those guys again half an hour later, so.
Wow. Impressive.
It was fun. Fortunately, we were shooting in Wellington at the studio at that point. If we'd been out in the mountains, I would have been out of luck. They said, what's super glue? Just keep working.
All three of those movies got Best Picture nominations. Of course, the final one won 11 Academy Awards and everything. What was your personal favorite of them?
I've answered this before and gotten a lot of grief for it from people and misinterpreted. So I'll just say the extended version of the first movie, I particularly liked simply because it was the one in which there was the most human-to-human actor contact. They got increasingly more, and I have nothing against it. That's what's been misinterpreted. The special effects stuff, the green screen stuff and all that, the CG work, which is, it was groundbreaking. But I like working with people, and more than I like imagining that they're there, although I've done that, and that's okay too. When you have to. But I'd rather work with somebody. And it was also the one that seemed to adhere most closely to the actual words of Tolkien. Things gradually became, in the spirit of Tolkien, it kept being done. But the extended version of The Fellowship of the Ring, I thought was the closest, from my point of view, to the actual work of J.R.R. Tolkien. And
it's cool. Yeah. I know you're an accomplished horseman and swordsman and all of that. The people that work with you say you're among the best they've ever seen do the sword work, first of all. I know Mr. Anderson said...
Bob Anderson.
Yeah, Bob Anderson said, without doubt, the best he's ever seen, and he's a legend in that.
He's amazing. He's passed away, unfortunately, but I got to work with him twice. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, and also El Triste, which was a 17th century Spanish movie, big production for Spain.